And welcome back to the Big Board. So I thought what might be interesting to do is try and have a formal look at how, let's see if I can swap seats because I'm going to be squeaking around a little bit here. Have a formal look or discussion of strategy in OCS. It's the enemy's position overall. What are going to be the enemy's priorities, whether it's force preservation or maximizing losses or maintaining some sort of positional advantage. They do a fairly detailed assessment of the supply levels, the trace network, and the triggers, the VP triggers, railhead locations, and things like that for the enemy. And obviously, then there's the morale aspect, which is what mode of player are you playing? Number one, but then number two. What's the situation with the army you're fighting? Are they victorious? Are they winning? Are they moving forward? Do they have momentum, or are they losing? All of these can be things that can be factored into an assessment of the game and your play and your strategy. Typically, there's an argument to be had for. Once you've done that assessment, you need to look at your own situation. Which we just did in the last video, looking at what some of the trace paths might be. Very open in this part of the map, obviously enough. Where are your dumps? How accessible are they? Where are your headquarters in relation to those dumps? Are those dumps protected? Is there a railway network near them? How efficiently can you use whatever limited transport capabilities you have to shuttle shit around when you screw stuff up? And then, trying to understand what are you going to need and where are you going to need it and when will you need it. If you're planning an offensive, you can't just kind of rush off and go barreling up and attack everything. You really need to think about where you're going to attack. Oh my gosh. Maybe this is not very interesting. Maybe I'm even boring myself. Then I guess one of the things I like to look at is how you're going to play the air war. Here with limited air resources, you only have 8 to 10 units at the start, and that builds up over time. But those units need to be, as the allies, need to be used very carefully. But it's always worthwhile taking a shot at knocking out the enemy's air force and their capacity to provide air support or counterattack using their air. So knocking out those 109s and those, there's a few ME-262s in this game, knocking those out, getting them out of the way can make a big difference for the allied player to give them absolute superiority over any given combat situation. One of the hard things to do solo is maintaining a reserve, right? Keeping a reserve in case the enemy player does something you don't expect, or there's an unforeseen threat or attack vector that you haven't considered. A little hard to do that when you're playing solo, so I tend not to keep too much in reserve, although with each armored division as in the US force, I am keeping the actual reserve unit back to be prepared to either exploit or support an unknown threat. Lots of things to consider for when you're playing opposed. Both sides need to assess the other player. Is the player wily? Is he a bash and smash type of guy? Is he the sort of person that's going to set traps for you or briar patches? You name it. Those things are important to take into consideration. The other thing, making sure you keep those, when we talked about air earlier on, keeping those airfields, make sure they have enough supply as well is always a big deal. And then I guess as you get into the game, you're then looking at, okay, how am I going to, what am I moving? Where is it moving to? Is it a blocking movement or is it an attack type of movement? Are we going to be in trace supply when we get to where we're going? Are we looking at using strategic movement anywhere on the map? If so, what are we going to do with the units when they get to where they're going? A lot of folks will think about how they want to use their artillery. You rarely get to use it. This game may be different on the West Front, purely because I think there's an opportunity here to really build up a little bit of a supply reserve once you clear some of the ports, and then start laying into some of those attacks with some heavy preparatory artillery barrages, if you can get the right supply to the right location at the right time. The other thing to consider when you're planning your move, you need to be looking at what's going on with your enemy's capacity to counter you, to leverage air to break up your reserve opportunities that you may have put units in reserve, and they're looking to pop those guys out of reserve with an air barrage or an artillery barrage. You also need to assess how you are going to tackle any counterattacks. So if you attack and push your units through an exploit, release your reserves, send them in, how are you going to react if they unleash their reserves and counterattack you? What are you going to do to thwart that counterattack and prevent your forces from being isolated? So all these things need to be thoughtfully considered, from the high-level strategic aspects of the game, where you are taking in the overall victory conditions, your force dispositions, your enemy's force dispositions, your enemy's supply situation, and your supply situation, and then drilling down as you go, picking a plan or two, planning out the supply that's going to be required for this turn, next turn, maybe even the turn or 2 turns afterwards. How are you going to get the supply to where you need it? How are you going to conduct the movement to the combat and not give your hand away, perhaps? And how are you going to execute those combats so that you make the most of them and achieve your objectives, whether it be an interim objective or an actual VP collection opportunity? So lots of good stuff in the planning stages of playing OCS. That's one of the fun things about this game, is to have it all set up and then start digging in and thinking about what you could do, where you could do it, and what will happen 3, 4, 5, 6 turns from there. So anyway, that's probably a little too much abstract nonsense and not enough dice rolling. So we'll leave it at that. Thanks for hanging out with us on the big board, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon. Take care.